Hey guys, Paul Brown here with Wasson Watch Company, and I want to talk to you about something I saw today, which is maybe one of the most evil, insidious things I've seen in a long time. And, there's a lot of evil, insidious things in the world, and a lot of them are not surprising. We expect very evil people to do very evil things. Bad things do happen. We're not surprised when the Iranian Revolutionary Guard murders civilians in their country in support of their despotic, tyrannical regime. We're not surprised when we see people on the left making up lies about Donald Trump or calling for the dissolution of the state of Israel in favor of Palestine. We're not surprised when a convict who committed evil, heinous, violent crimes is let out of prison and then he reoffends, especially when that sentence is egregiously light, as is often the case these days. But I think what is so insidious about this is something I saw from a pastor, a man who calls himself a Christian, calls himself a pastor of a Presbyterian church. It's a post that I saw on X, someone shared with me, from Michael Spangler, the pastor of Piedmont Presbyterian Church, which I believe is in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, though their website doesn't give their exact location. None of his web pages or websites give their location, probably because, they want to maintain a little bit more anonymity just because of the vile nature of the things that this man has said and is saying. And I'm not going to go through and share all the different posts and things he's said over the time. There's a lot of vile things he said in the past, but this particular post really struck me as egregious, and so I'm going to read it to you. Again, this is on X, formerly known as Twitter. What he said was, "One of the most subversive books around, The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom. It celebrates shielding Christ's enemies from the political consequences of their evil, promotes lying to do so, glorifies resistance to just government and co-belligerence with communists, paints the just consequences for these actions as persecution, and does so all in the name of white Protestant Christianity. 24 copies are available at your local Christian homeschool bookstore. Ministers cite it in the pulpit as something well known and beloved. The rot is very deep." That's what Michael Spangler said about The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom. Now, many of you, if you're watching this, may be familiar with The Hiding Place. Maybe you've read it yourself. I've got a copy right here. I've read it a couple times, though it's been many years since I've read it. If you haven't read it, I commend it to you highly. It's an amazing read. And I'll give you a little rundown. Corrie ten Boom was, she was born in the 1890s, I believe 1892. And so she was, she passed away a number of years ago. And when World War II rolled around, she and her family, that is her father and her sister, shielded Jews from Nazi persecution in Amsterdam, where they lived. They would hide Jews in their home. And from what I've read, I think there were at least several hundred Jewish people who came through their home during and around World War II, seeking safety, seeking a safe haven. And in this book, The Hiding Place, Corrie ten Boom writes about those events. She writes about some of her life leading up to World War II, even going as far back as to her childhood. And then she writes very specifically about what happened during World War II. And, not to spoil it, but they hide Jews in their home, and the Nazis eventually do catch on, and they come in and they, arrest everyone in the house. As far as the family is concerned, they arrest Corrie and her sister and her father. And thankfully, they missed the Jews. They weren't able to find them. God shielded them and protected them, and they escaped. But Corrie and her father and sister end up getting imprisoned, and her father dies pretty shortly thereafter. He was already elderly. Corey and her sister were, I believe, in their 40s or maybe very early 50s at that time. And they end up getting sent to a camp, to a concentration camp with the most horrid conditions in terms of starvation and disease and lice and fleas and dirtiness and cold and cramped, right? They're in these bunkhouses where they're all, on these wide, long bunk beds, but they're stacked next together one by one. All the horrid, evil, terrible things you hear about concentration camps in the time of Nazi Germany. And she survived that ordeal. Her sister Betsy did not. Really, I think it was pretty shortly before Corey was released, her sister finally gets sick and succumbs to her illness and dies. Corey, shortly after that is released, she receives discharge papers. She gets let go. I don't think she ever really fully found out why, but based on what she was able to uncover, it seemed like it was likely a clerical error as to why she got released. And shortly after she got released, the women around her age range were all killed by the Nazis in that particular concentration camp. So I'd say her survival even was quite miraculous. But what underpins Corey and Betsy and their father's godliness and I'd say moral courage in that time and steadfastness and integrity, right? Because they didn't, after the Germans captured them, they didn't give up the Jews. They didn't tell them where they were. They didn't essentially turn them in to save their own skins. They just did the right thing. And what underpins that is that family's faith. From the time that Corey was a little girl, her father was reading the Bible to that family. The stories she has about her father are often him sharing godly truth with her and the rest of her family. And this is a very godly Christian family. I think one of the most profound ways to illustrate Corey's character, other than just her willingness to literally put her life on the line for other people who were not family members, not friends. These were mostly strangers. They may have all been strangers prior to them coming through their home for safety. The other thing that really highlights or illustrates her character is that after the war, Corey had survived, and she went on tour and she gave speeches at different places about the horrors of the Holocaust and the horrors of the Nazi persecution of Jews and those who helped them, as well as others. And she finished giving a talk, and a man approached her afterwards, and he was, his face was all lit up. He was very happy to see her. He's like, "Hey, I was one of the guards at the camp that you were at." He greeted her like he was greeting an old friend, they went way back, like you run into a colleague from the old days, and you're just like, "Oh, it's so good to see you." And of course, she was shocked, taken aback. Here's a man who oversaw her persecution and deprivation and the conditions in which so many around her died, including her beloved sister, Betsy. And at first, she just did not know how to handle that. She was like, I don't want to talk to this man. I don't want anything to do with this man. This man is a Nazi. This man is someone who's done horrible things for horrible reasons. And what stuck with her, though, the pebble in her shoe, so to speak, was that she should forgive him as Christ had forgiven her. And she had to think about that for a little while and come to terms with that. But she did end up forgiving him, a man who had participated in the unspeakable acts against Corey and her family and many other individuals and families, part of a much larger system that had on an unprecedented scale committed unspeakable acts against people and people groups, especially the Jews. And she felt that she needed to forgive him, and she did forgive him. And if that is not a more clear model of moral courage, of integrity, of righteousness, of goodness, of godliness, of faithfulness, then I don't know what it is. And so for Michael Spangler to call this book one of the most subversive books out there, I think it demonstrates a profound level of corruption and wickedness and evil and all the rest that you can think of to describe that. It's really shocking. And to make matters worse, this is a man, he's not the most famous. You might not have ever heard of him before. I'm not saying he's someone whose name crosses my mind every day or who I see on my X feed all the time or anything like that. But he does have somewhat of a following. And you know what? There's a particular group of guys who sympathize with the things that he has said, who might agree fully with the things he's said, that I think need to be called out for agreeing with him, for following with him, for being friends with him, whatever you want to say, for being in the same camp with him. Because the reality is this. There's a lot of people who are saying that we have a problem with anti-Semitism on the right, and they're wrong. I'm sorry. We have a problem with anti-Semitism on the right, and they are right. Juxtaposing certain words here. They're correct. But I don't know that that's metastasized yet. I don't know that that problem has become so deep that it's something that we cannot yet recover from. I do believe that if courageous people, courageous men and women, will stand up on the right in very clear opposition to the types who would call Corrie ten Boom subversive, who would call the Nazi government just, who would call the consequences of the actions the Nazis took against the Jews as the just consequences for their evil. If people will stand up boldly against that kind of thing, and the people who associate with people who say that or who defend them or who say similar things, then I think we're going to be able to overcome it. If people remain silent because they don't want to be controversial, they don't want to rock the boat, because they adhere to the false, evil idea of no enemies to the right, or the friend-enemy distinction, which is a Nazi idea, a Nazi concept, by the way, heavily used by Islam as well, if you must know. And because they're afraid of people coming after them. They're afraid of these ostensible Nazi sympathizers coming after them. They're afraid of armies of anonymous people, whether they be bots or true people or people overseas or whatever it is. There's a lot of fear, and there's a lot of reasons people choose not to speak up. But if people will speak up, I think that we can deal with this problem effectively. And so one of the things I'm going to do now is I'm going to speak up about some of the people I see following Spangler. And this is publicly available information. It's on his X account right now. And just one side note with this, look, I'm not going to say that a follow equals an endorsement, okay? A lot of people follow people because they want to know what they're saying, all right? There are people I follow who I don't necessarily endorse, though I more and more so these days I try not to do that because I just want to give them the least attention possible. But here's a list of people who follow Michael Spangler and who I've seen say things that are either similar to that or I don't believe, if I'm calling them out right now, I don't believe that they will actually do anything to distance themselves from Michael Spangler and what he has said and what he is saying. And if they prove me wrong by distancing themselves, then that's great. Please do know that there's always the opportunity for redemption. And anyway, so some of these names are Joshua Abatoy, Stephen Wolf, Eric Kahn, Brian Suave. I don't know if that's how you say his last name, or Suave or Salve or whatever. Joel Webben, not a big surprise. Dale Partridge, Jeff Wright, You might be familiar with some of these names. You may have never heard of them before. Those are the biggest names I can find of non-anonymous individuals. But that's a group of people that if you're not familiar with, you just need to know that they're constantly playing on the line. They're trying to seem like they're not truly anti-Semitic, that they don't hate Jews, but they have these nuanced views about Jews that, they're Christians first or something. You'll hear a lot of lies if you listen to the people in that group. And they shouldn't be given any foothold on the right within Christianity, within conservatism, within groups that would call themselves patriotic. They need to be marked and avoided. And again, all the people I listed on that list, if they want to come back and say, no, I categorically condemn Michael Spengler and what he said in that post and other posts he's said that justify the Holocaust, justify Nazi evil perpetrated against Jews and so on, then great. Like, let's have that conversation. There's always the opportunity for that. But if they're not going to do that, if they're just going to dig their heels in and see like, oh, you're canceling us, you're coming after us saying these things, then no, you're just doubling down. You're essentially defending what he's doing at that point, and you're making it clear that you're in agreement. That would be my interpretation of that, at least. Guys, I want to reemphasize something I said a minute ago, and that is that the way to deal with this is for principled people to stand up boldly and courageously against it. We're not going to solve this by being silent. This is not going to blow over on its own. This is not going to go away by itself. All right? This is insidious, deep, dark evil. And it may be painful to try to get rid of it, but we must. If we are anyone who would call themselves a moral person, a godly person, a God-fearing person, a righteous person, a faithful person, a loving person, absolutely must do this. And so that's my admonition for you today. I don't have anything else to say about that, but I hope you have a great day.